And you're live. Go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to April's edition. I can't believe it's April already. Meet our contributors. I am Paris. I work at Google on Kubernetes community. We have a few contributors here with us today to answer any upstream related questions that you have. That could include what's your favorite color, all the way to why is my test failing. So really anything in between. First, we're going to do a little bit of intros, and then we're going to get right into it. If you are watching this and have a question, you can either address those in the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel of the same name, or I will be checking Twitter intermittently with the hashtag of K8SMOC for Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. Also, if you have any anonymous questions, feel free to send them to me directly on a DM in chat. I do get those frequently, and that's totally okay. And then we will start with introductions. Sadev, why don't you start with just a brief intro of yourself, maybe what SIGs that you're involved with, and how you got to start contributing upstream to Kubernetes.
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. Myself, Sadev Zala. I'm with IBM. So I'm doing open source in general for like 5 years now, and Kubernetes in particular for about a year now. I am actually contributing to contributor experience special interest group and issue triage within Kubernetes. I started with Kubernetes, and I got to be honest here, because of I work at IBM. So, I was, when I said I'm doing open source for 5 years, I started with OpenStack in 2013. OpenStack, Oasis, Tosca, so IBM is, interest in open source communities, right? A big time. And we moved with Kubernetes, and that's where I moved to Kubernetes as well. I love the community. It's a great community. Very pleased to be a contributor here.
And we are pleased to have you, Sadev. Thanks so much for all your help and contributor experience. Sure, Chris, do you want to give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure. My name is Chris Love. I work for a company by the name of C&M Consulting. I've been working with Kubernetes for, goodness, almost 2 years now. One of my claims to fame is I contributed Java code to the Kubernetes main project. There used to be a Cassandra seed provider within the examples, and that was actually some of the first code that I touched, which is kind of scary when you say you work on Java code and you worked on Kubernetes. Since then, I moved on to helping out with COPS, which is one of the installers that Kubernetes hosts. I've worked with SIG AWS, I've worked with SIG ContribUX. Most recently, I've actually been monkeying around with our tests, or end-to-end testing. We've got HA testing up and going with AWS, and we're working on getting HA control plane going on with GCE. So glad to be here, Paris. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks. And this series is a part of our mentoring program, of which Chris is a part of. We are doing a group cohort together where we graduate individuals into the next level. And next level would be levels on our contributor ladder. That would be member, approver, reviewer, and maintainer. Thanks, Chris, for all your help with that. And then last but not least, George Castro on our ones and twos being YouTube.
Yeah, hi, I'm George. Mostly here, I'm making sure that the live stream works well. So hello to the 12 of you watching live and to the 109 of you in the Slack channel.
Y'all.
Yeah. So it's interesting as the session goes on, the number always raises. So I'm interested in seeing if we can have some numbers.
And also for those listening and watching, we will have another session this afternoon. That's the US friendly time zone. This is our EMEA friendly time zone. So let's get right into the questions. Our first question came from Teague on Slack, and it looks like Teague's actually interested in developer relations, specifically maybe even for Kubernetes. But the question is, what steps can I take to become a developer advocate? And for any looks like for any open source technology, the more he reads about it, the more it sounds like something that he really wants to get into. It looks like he also made a career change possibly 2 years ago into maybe even engineering. I know I have a comment for this. Sadev, maybe you might. Does anybody else have any comments for how someone can get into Kubernetes developer relations or advocacy?
Absolutely, I can brief on that question. So I mean, first, it's I think a great thinking right there, right? Kubernetes developer advocacy. So many things, and I think the question also sort of consider open source in general, Kubernetes in particular, right? I think last few years I've been seeing lots and lots of focus on open source, right? Kubernetes in last 2 to 3 years, it became a de facto platform for container orchestration. So much a demand in skill in areas like developer advocacy, right? Like I said earlier, it's a great community for you to be developer advocate. I would highly recommend, right, and contributing as well. I think that's the best way to learn about Kubernetes, right? So many resources, and Paris and others here can point to so many resources as well. But I would say start learning Kubernetes. There are several different repositories. Kubernetes website repository on GitHub, a great resource for user. Kubernetes community website, a great resource if you want to start contributing to Kubernetes and see how the flow works there, right? What's the sort of a pull request workflow, what's the issue life cycle, and Kubernetes repo, all the base codes are there, and there are over 50 repositories under Kubernetes GitHub repo. So as you start learning, one of the other things with the developer advocacy I would highly recommend is finding a local meetup group, for example, right? I've been seeing lots of local meetup groups in different cities. So I would say, find a local meetup groups, attend it regularly. Typically, they meet every month. Attendees and start sort of taking ownership of like a presentation topics, right? As you learn more, as you do more, right? Do some POCs, develop an app, make sure it works with like a microservices, containerized application works great with Kubernetes, right? And sort of showcase it to the people, right? And that's where I would say you start getting recognition as an like a developer advocate around Kubernetes ecosystem. And I think that probably is the way to start there.
Excuse me, I think you actually made a great point about meetups. If folks are really interested in getting into developer advocacy and relations, I think the best foundational way is to start putting yourself out there through meetups at the local level. It's a great way to get exposure, to get talk experience. I think writing, speaking, and building stuff are kind of the 3 key things for developer advocacy, and of course teaching. So and even doing videos like YouTube videos are also another great way to start. Writing blog posts is a great way to start about teaching folks how to do things. That it really just, again, putting yourself out there to be that advocate would be awesome and a great way to start. And that's how people gain followers. You gain certain knowledge that way as well. So I think all of those are really great stepping stones. Chris or George, do you have anything to add? Oh.
Yeah, I just want to add something real quick. Remember to approach it holistically. Something I've learned as well is people might tell you, hey, can you explain to my coworkers or something, about Kubernetes and whatnot. But by the time you're done talking, you're talking about pipelines and a whole bunch of other DevOps related stuff. So Kubernetes is the tool I think that people will use to implement a lot of the things that they want. But be ready to not talk about Kubernetes at all and just kind of using Kubernetes as like a means to the end to get there where they want to be. So just something to look out for, right?
Yeah. And Teague's follow-up is, so it's not necessarily a job you apply to, but you have to get your name out there by being a contributor and posting blog posts, etc.
Well,
I mean, it is technically, there are jobs available that you apply to that are developer advocates, but in order to get those jobs, there's usually a prerequisite of doing some similar work like that before. And I think the best way to do it is like what George is saying too, which is bring it in-house maybe and teach your current staff those things and build that in-house first. And then you gain the experience, and then of course you can apply to jobs that are like developer advocacy and developer relations externally. Or even I've seen a lot of engineers who have built developer advocacy roles in their own organizations just by doing this stuff and proving how much this position is worth, which is a lot. So anybody else have anything that they wanted to touch there?
Wanted to mention that the CNCF has an ambassadors program.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Which is, in my opinion, one of the things that CNCF does really well. But again, it's you need to get established in the community. You need to be speaking at meetups. You kind of need to build a brand and look at it that way in terms of marketing. But you're marketing to help the community. And then there's an application process for that with the CNCF. So, but yeah, just to reiterate what people have said, the best thing to do is to speak at local meetups. Local meetups are constantly looking for new speakers. KubeCon, that's a whole other ball of wax to get accepted into. So don't feel bad if you miss out on that one, but local meetups are super easy to get into to talk.
Yep. And I would add one more point. The fantastic thing about open source, right? Projects, big scale project like Kubernetes and other projects. Everything you do is it's sort of easy for people to access about what you've been doing, right? So build your GitHub profile, right? And other things, which blog posts like Paris mentioned. Everything it's sort of available for folks to take a look anytime they want. You don't have to really do one-on-one sort of resume exchange there or anything like that, right? So building the public profile is also important.
Yeah, exactly. And looks like Teague's just finishing up this conversation and saying that this is all good information. And that his class and full-time schedule is already quite a bit, which is also another good point. Don't burn yourself out with developer advocacy. We definitely, I think all of us on this line definitely tend to take this as both a job and a hobby, and that can definitely lead to burnout. So those listening, please self-care in the developer advocacy world, and open source in general. All right, thanks for that question, Teague. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, next one in Slack. How can they start contributing to the node network side of Kubernetes? Something that they can start helping with if they're pointed to start contributing. What they've seen is that picking up that first issue is the hardest part of the whole process. How can I start getting those first easy to start with issues? I've been pointed to check out Help Wanted, but honestly, those are not the easiest to fix. Just quick update there. We are implementing a good first time issue label, but that is in the process. So definitely hold for that and don't necessarily hold up your contribution process for that either. But that's just for the general mass that we have heard this as an issue. And yes, we are fixing that. Our Help Wanted is generally geared towards experienced contributors and those that have a lot of experience with those issues. So yes, we've heard you loud and clear, but contributors on the line, what are some other tips that you can give this individual, especially if you know anything about the node networking side of the house?
I can take turn here. I can go first. So a few things, right? As a new contributor, if you're looking for your sort of first issue to work in any particular domain, right? Networking or something else. The first thing I would say, if you are totally new, I mean, even though your interest is networking, which that's where you're gonna grow yourself, you're gonna provide lots of help to community. Take a look at any issues as well, right? So one of the things, because I work on issue triage side, I found looking at the issues in general, if you go to the Kubernetes repo, look at the issues, tons of issues, right? There's no sort of scarcity of issues there, which is good. We have people, filing issues work as they adopt Kubernetes more and more. As you just take a quick look at issues, right? Not necessarily, like Pei said, community is working on it, but not necessarily, you really have a label on it, which sort of a first-time contributors can take a look at it. But as you take a look to the issues in general, you'll find issues that, oh yeah, this looks easier, right? It looks easy to start. I can just go ahead and create like a PR for that, right? And that any like I said, any even not networking specific issue, it will give you a good idea about the PR workflow, right? About the Git workflow, right? GitHub updates. And networking, we have labels, right? For every SIG has its own label. So for networking, there's a SIG network label out there. There is a label tab right at the next to the issue search the page, and looking at particular labels, you can find all the issues related to networking there. Again, not necessarily something is labeled as for a new contributor, but just take a look, right? And just by looking at issues in general, you will educate yourself a lot and find the one which you think, hey, I can just go ahead and provide a fix. And just one quick tip there as well: don't be afraid that, hey, this doesn't suit you. Whatever fix you thinking it's the right fix, provide that fix, right? Create a PR, and that's where you gonna get help from reviewers as well, right? We are so fortunate, I based on my own experience, the reviewers are great. They provide lots of help. If your fix doesn't make sense, they actually help to write the fix, as in for the new contributors, right? So that's I think a great way to start with. Yeah.
Good response. My voice today is not great. Chris, did you have anything to add to that?
Unfortunately, I dropped out, so hopefully I don't duplicate.
It's okay, even if you do. That might mean it's a good point.
There you go. The big thing is for me is go to attend the special interest groups meetings, just to ensure that everybody knows what a special interest group that's watching this is. We have community meetings that are geared around specific groups that own different aspects of Kubernetes. We mentioned SIG Contribx, and we have how many? We have 70-ish now. Paris, it's snowballing.
Oh, we're not that high yet. I think we are at 38. That's
600 last count.
35 plus.
Yeah, I think it seems like 600. It really does, especially with mailing lists and Slack and everything like that. So I definitely hear your point there.
but back, need I digress? You mentioned Node and you mentioned Network. Those are two separate special interest groups. Both of those will have leads. You can definitely reach out to leads. They are busy, just to let you know. But you can reach out and say, hey, are there any issues that need to be triaged? Are there any PRs that are pretty easy that need to be fixed? Do you have any recommendations for that? The other thing that always needs a little TLC is our testing. So if you're able to dig in and add more unit tests, if you're able to dig in and add more end-to-end testing for networking, for networking specifically, I know that there's we're probably lacking on load testing. I might be wrong, but just going through and working on it's not the most glamorous work, but it's the work that needs to be done. Also, new features. Most people tend to want to add some special new feature to Kubernetes. There's actually specific processes for that, and it's typically not the best place to tiptoe into as a new contributor. But glad you're here. Reach out to Paris if you're interested in the mentorship program as well, since you are a new contributor. And keep on plugging away. I understand it's a big community, but great question.
Yeah. I think another tip too is start with docs of the area that you're interested in. So in this case, Node and Network both have related docs, and the docs team loves new contributors, loves folks helping out and poking holes in docs and filling in those blanks. And that's really a great way to get to know that community as well as the area of interest that you're trying to jump into. I know a lot of people that have come through the docs contribution gateway, if you will, and it seems to be a really great, successful ramp and launch up. Because then, like what Chris and Saad were mentioning, you get to meet people, you get to see who is in like chair and leadership and technical lead type of roles. And it really helps you get acclimated and makes people feel a little bit more comfortable. So I think docs is a great way. Thanks for that question. That was
I wanted to add a quick thing.
Yeah, sure.
Don't just attend the meetings. So everyone who attends the meetings hates taking notes. But if you really want to understand something, because if you attend meeting, you tend to kind of glaze over, maybe you'll open a browser and look up other things. But if you take notes, it forces you to pay attention. And it really helps you understand what they're talking about as you try to figure out how to write down what they just said. And one of the great things is most things are always struggling to find a note taker and things like that, and people automatically like really appreciate it, right? So if you're like, hey, I could take notes for the next 3-4 meetings or whatever, you would immediately, people will immediately be like, oh, okay, this person like is already helping out, and they'll remember that. And getting those notes important, because not everyone can attend the live meetings or watch the videos, but publishing those notes for the community is like really important. So it's like an important thing that a lot of people overlook. And it's like I find that it's a good way to force myself to understand what they're talking about as opposed to just glazing it over. And it's hard, but it's a lot of fun.
Definitely good point, George. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, and then let's see. Several people are looking in the chat, but there is a question queued up in my DM. Looks like they also asked this in Kubernetes Dev Slack channel as well. For those that don't know, Kubernetes Dev is the upstream channel on Slack. So, hey folks, I'm trying to run code gen for my CRD, where some of the types are from third-party vendor, Azure in this case. I'd like to avoid duplicating them, but CodeGen doesn't seem to recursively deep copy the structs outside of my package. Is anyone having the same problem? And curious as to what thoughts are here. This is possibly a Chris Love one.
Possibly API machinery question, actually.
Okay.
So I do not have in-depth understanding of how exactly the struct should be copied across. But what I would recommend doing is asking that channel on the SIG API machinery, or asking that same question on the SIG API machinery, as well as it's definitely appropriate for you to put a question like that on the agenda, because it sounds like something that should be documented. But yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for it.
Again, I will ditto what Chris said, right? If you ask a question in the mailing list and if you didn't get a reply, right, it can happen because of there are so many mails out there, right? I mean, not that people don't respond, but many times it just get buried under the pile of emails. Asking on the SIG, or I would say, like Chris said, put it in the agenda, right? That will force people to take a look, be in that SIG meeting, just put in the agenda, and unless there is too many items at that particular meeting. So typically we always have a SIG meetings where we cover pretty much all the agenda, right? So that would be sort of a quick way of getting someone's attention there.
Yeah. All right. Cool. And then there is another question. This one looks like any other conferences that we would suggest outside of KubeCon, I guess, for this industry. As a student, they get pretty heavily discounted registration fees, so they wanted to take advantage of that. Any conferences that you would suggest outside of KubeCon?
I've got so many.
I have so many too. So,
Yeah.
ever, Chris, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I mean, so yeah, there are so many conferences out there, right? So if your interest is only Kubernetes, right? Like we said earlier, start with the meetup, right? That's free. You're not going to use your discount there, so that's sort of granted access. But KubeCons are those two KubeCons are those are the two flagship conferences for the project, right? So you definitely want to use your discount there. Other conferences, I would say Linux Foundation, the CNCF Foundation has it's a list of conferences, right? Many times it's like Kubernetes for like a East Zone, for example, right? Something is happening covering only a particular coast of country, or in like a particular country, right? Continent, like something in Europe, right? That is more focused just for the small scale or mid scale level. So I would say look at the CNCF conferences out there, right? Linux Foundation conference there. If you're interested in Kubernetes, all other CNCF projects, right? Prometheus, Fluentd, all the other projects, they are very related, right? People, you might be using one of them. There are those project-specific conferences out there as well, right? In a little smaller scale. So those are good to attend as well. So yeah, there's a whole list of conferences here.
And Chris, do you have any conference suggestions?
Actually, strangely, I don't attend a lot of conferences.
Okay.
So I would not be the one to ask. Not that I don't enjoy them.
Well, I think for our industry, like what Sadev mentioned, Linux Foundation, I think they have 20 plus at this point. Some of their highlights, I think, are Open Source Summit, which has a ton of Kubernetes topics now. You'll see a lot of Kubernetes topics at almost every Linux Foundation event at this point, and I know that they do have discounts for students. The larger conferences are most likely going to have discounts, but some other conferences that you might want to think about that might even not have student discounts are like DevOps Days. There are tons of DevOps days all over the world. They're smaller, a little bit more intimate, have some very good technical content that flows through. And I'm pretty sure there's one in Pittsburgh where you're located, and several others on the East Coast. There's also DockerCon, which I don't know if they have a student discount, but I'm sure they have some kind of arrangement that you could work out. But that would be a premier conference for the container industry. Let's see, what else? OSCON, any O'Reilly conferences actually probably have student discounts. So that's OSCON, that's Velocity. There's also ShriCon now. I think ShriCon actually already is finished, which is site reliability engineering, which of course has a lot of Kubernetes topics as well. So yeah, any of the larger conferences will probably cater that, but I just wanted to make the little caveat that definitely check out some of those smaller conferences that are homegrown to you. Especially, this is also coming from the individual that was interested in developer advocacy and relations. But some of those smaller conferences will actually may get you more ahead of your career goals. And George, what did you have to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I really love the community-run conferences, especially if you're a student. They could be relatively cheap to get into, so a conference like Scale. And it's at DevOps Days, usually one thing you can do is, one thing I like to do when I was younger and I couldn't afford to go to any conferences, is volunteer to help plan like a DevOps Days or something like that, and then you will naturally start to be involved more in your local community and get to know people who know the stuff well. So, I know some of them do, hey, I'll help run a workshop or whatever, can I get a comp ticket or something? I'm a student, things like that. So, be creative.
That's definitely a great point too. Definitely volunteer. I know a lot of students and in my past life too volunteered for free tickets. It almost feels like a music festival. Like we are to music as what nerds are to conferences. um, so someone said in the chat to GopherCon, which is also an awesome conference, and yes, the project's built on GoLine, so that makes perfect sense. It also Scale, which George just mentioned, which is a great smaller show in Pasadena, California. And looks like questions are coming in. No questions, just comments. All right. Contributors, do you have any questions for each other? I hate to put you on the spot, but I actually like this. The last time we actually had some really great questions for each other.
Yeah. We can share anything we want to share,
All right.
Well,
Let me look. I'm going to start fishing some questions from other channels. Hold on one second. Let's see. I don't see any more questions, so we might actually wrap this early.
sure.
Let's see here. I'm checking Twitter now. I'll do a last call for questions as well. Hold on. Let me get that into the channel. In the meantime, what's a good tip to learn about testing, Chris? Because I know earlier you were talking about digging into testing, and if folks are unsure of our testing infra, or say like a test is flaking and they have no idea what's going on, what are some tips that you can give folks from the testing side of the house and trying to figure that out?
right. So unfortunately, how do I not? Our current testing documentation that's under community needs some TLC because it refers to, I'd say, a little bit old. So there's been a migration of the testing code out of Kubernetes into Kubernetes/test-infra. And primarily so there's two different types of tests, and the tests I'm talking about with test-infra are end-to-end tests. Let me say a small bit of what the heck that actually is, because I don't know if most people who are watching this will actually know. We have a full set of, not only do we run unit tests, but when we have a PR that comes into a project like Kubernetes, the primary project, or like COPS, a Kubernetes cluster spun up, and we run a full battery of tests against the Kubernetes cluster. We've been migrating all of the infrastructure that runs that process out of the main Kubernetes repo into test-infra. There's a program called kubetest there, and there's actually a folder called kubetest. That's a really good place to start. Typically, it's going to require that you have a cloud account, such as AWS or GCE, and ask questions, file issues. The testing folks are really good about responding back to issues and interacting. You can definitely reach out and ask on those. Just from unit tests, though, you can look at, like gentleman was interested in node testing and network. You can look at the coverage in the code, and you can just tell, okay, look, we should maybe have a couple more unit tests here. Look at where those are. Flakes are an interesting thing. It's actually a word that means that a end-to-end test fails, but it fails because of, say, another test is running alongside it, and the two tests interfere and clash. So if you rerun the full end-to-end test suite, it then passes. Hence, it's a flake. Tracking down flakes, definitely, again, reach out to the test. There's two different testing channels. You can ask, okay, is this a noted flake? Search through the issues, because typically flakes are listed, and then try to determine if you can figure out what's going on with that. Yeah, been working on getting the control plane up and running with HA testing. So that's a whole new area that we don't have much testing behind, meaning that we have 3 nodes in the control plane rather than 1, which means we're running HA etcd as well as all the other components in the system are HA. So, we don't have any testing currently around that area.
All right, and then 2 follow-up questions for you, Chris. One, what is TLC? Someone said that you mentioned that.
Tender loving care. In other words, we need some work on it.
All right, yes, tender love and care. And then someone else had another follow-up question about testing. How would one conduct performance testing on a disturbed environment?
Distributed?
I wonder if they mean. I was like, I wonder if they mean distributed.
Yeah. Well, we're often disturbed as developers.
Yeah.
All sarcasm. All sarcasm.
It's a distributed disturbance.
There we go. So on a distributed environment, that's so there's so there's kind of like phishing. So in my mind, there's load testing, and then there's darn lies. So if you are attempting to do load testing in a cloud environment, there's usually too many variables involved, and specifically the cloud provider may see that you're doing load testing on their environment and start putting in limits out of the blue on you. So what you want to do is create an environment that you're like, the best thing that I've found is to do almost an A/B type testing in a production environment. So if you're rolling out, say, a new system, get it into a heavily used environment that's already going. Nice thing about Kubernetes is that you can actually not kill production and still run tests in production because of the distributed fashion. That's often a really good way to do it. Now, if you're on bare metal, that's a whole other game because you have specific control of your environment. We do have a couple of load tests under add-on, under one of the projects, if I remember, where we were trying to do 1 million transactions per second with Kubernetes. But yeah, it's not, that question is not something that, or the question you just asked is nothing but trivial. It's actually a very complicated question that we could talk about 2 hours on. And unfortunately, we don't have that much time.
Fair. Is it important to find the breakpoint of the system?
You want to take that one? Or you want me to?
You take it.
All right, I'll take it. Is it important to find the breakpoint of the system? I think I get what you mean. In other words, is it important to find where the system breaks and where it breaks down? The interesting thing about load testing is the system will often break in different and unusual ways. And you don't necessarily know what the root cause is. So I would say it's more important to understand when your system gets finicky. In other words, when the system tends to break under what amount of load, rather than the impetus of what's breaking it. Now, if you can continually reproduce, okay, controller X constantly fails, or I have my control plane spike at this point, then that's great. But don't expect that within testing a distributed system, you're going to get that. From my perspective, you're going to find out, okay, at this many transactions per second, between 60 to 80% of my load, my system's going to get a bit finicky and then start having issues. So I've had challenges where you start running load tests and it starts failing in 5 different ways. But at least consistently around a certain part of volume, it'll start failing.
All right, Sadev or George, anybody have anything to add to that? Silence means no.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I would add is it's not on top of my head, but I think we do have some benchmark test. Right? It's running those benchmarks, possibly a good idea to sort of get familiar with the load testing, right? So I think it should be easy to find out. It's somewhere in the in documentation as well. So just searching for those benchmark should give you good results to find them.
Awesome. All right. No more questions, but I actually have two for the group. First question is, what is one bit of information that you wished all new contributors knew? And then the second follow-up question to that is, what is one bit of information that you wish current contributors knew? Maybe things that things that are hidden away in docs, or things that don't get enough attention. What are two bits of advice, one for a new contributor and one for a current contributor, that you could give today on a Wednesday? Shout out for Chris. Just whoever wants to go first, shout it out.
Yeah, I can take it unless Chris want to go first.
All you. Gives
so,
me time to think about my answer.
Sort of, and it gives me that quick unloading myself, right, as I was thinking. So, no, perfect. So, for new contributors, right, I think I would say briefly, like, this is a great project. You made a right decision if you are going to contribute to Kubernetes. It's very rewarding, right? Personally, professionally. So this is great. One thing I would highly sort of recommend is, it's always good to do things you like to do, right? So if you're interested in doing something particular, that's great, right? I mean, we all get motivated by doing this. But also keep an eye, right, as you get familiar with the project, as you attend some of these meetings where probably initially you're just gonna in a listening mode, right? You're gonna listen to what's going on. I would highly recommend to attend Thursday's community call. As a new contributor, tons of information, right? What's going on in the community, right? And related point, which I would say is, try to provide help where it's needed, right? So community calls are one of the calls where you find out, like, hey, these are the areas where we need help, right? So whether that's not your domain, right? Still, you're gonna provide some help, regardless whether it's a issue triaging, whether it's a documentation fixes, right? Not always writing Go codes, right? But doing things where community needs help, it's great for the community. People have you develop a great respect from the community, right? From these active contributors, they know what you're doing. So and you make friends, right? And which is a great way to grow in the community. Okay.
That's a good one. I did not, I don't advocate for the community meeting as hard as I should, and that's actually a great point thought of.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. It's a great meeting, right? And for the current contributors, right? I mean, the current contributors, I think they are the one keeping the community running, right? Lots of in hundreds, thousands of them around the world. Lots of them are way more experienced than me. They're doing the right thing. They're doing lots of things the community needs. But current contributors, one of the things I would say, if it's one thing, while you contribute, writing code, doing fixes, right, or creating new features, do spend time on improving the processes, right? One of the place is ContribX, right, where we processes for sorry, I had a little bit I think internet dropped.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, just repeat
Okay.
the last 30 seconds.
That's the sure. Yeah.
Actually, might want to kill your video at this point.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Sorry, again, I think it dropped.
Yeah, try to kill your video.
Access point nearby. But yeah, for current contributors, I see while you contribute, be part of this discussion to improve the existing processes, right? If you don't like something, sort of discuss with the folks out there, for particular SIGs, just in general, to improve contributor experience, right? And that will actually improve your experience as you go forward with the further contributions. So that's my two small sort of advices there.
Well, I love the contributor experience plugs selfishly.
Absolutely.
And Chris, what are your two nuggets of wisdom for both new contributors and current contributors?
So go peruse /community. I know this is one of the things that we're working on in terms of contributor experience. But the information that's under /community and all the documents will help you. Like, you spend half a day reading through all of it, and you'll be a lot better for it, including community membership sign up process. Everybody asks, oh, where the heck's that document? And get an understanding. If you want to get involved in the community, you can set some goals in terms of around that. I'm going to plug the mentorship program again, because I think that has that we've got a lot of potential to help out the community and do something that's kind of so Kubernetes has done some pretty cool stuff for the open source community. I'd say it's revolutionary. I'm hoping to do just exciting stuff with the mentorship program in terms of making a scalable mentorship program. So Paris is the main contact for that, if you have any questions about that. For current contributors, I'm kind of pondering it. I'll go back to one of the things that we talked about in the leadership conference last year. Let's focus on stability. Be mindful of every piece of code that you put in, every new feature, because we're getting to the point with the system where it does amazing things. But let's all be mindful of stability of the system and of kind of, don't worry so much about your current features and the new features that you want to get in, but let's ensure that the system is just rock solid. And I know people are being mindful of that and focusing on that at this point, but in terms of where we're at as a community, I think that has a lot of importance right now.
Good. Thanks, Chris. George, any last words from the man behind the screen?
No, mostly I'm just listening in. Great points. Thanks.
All right. Yes, and this live stream, everyone, is actually a part of our mentoring program. It's not traditional, and that's the point. These are your mentors on demand. Consider them as such. That's why it's an open forum. That's why we are totally accepting what's your favorite color, because sometimes you might want to know what your mentor's favorite color is, and anything in between there that we can help out with, we would love to help. So that wraps today's edition of Meet Our Contributors. Actually, not today's, this time zone's Meet Our Contributors. Just a quick thanks to everyone that asked questions, Shiraj, Teague, G. Grover, et cetera, all from the Slack channel. And of course, huge thanks to Sadev and Chris for joining us this morning and taking time out of their day to answer random questions. And of course, thanks to George for spinning us up on YouTube. All right, and that kicks things off for the day here. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.